I'm Vanessa. I'm 34 years old. And last Sunday, my husband's sister looked me dead in the eye, smiled over her mimosa, and said, "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." I'm about to share something personal, but first, drop your city or country in the comments. Everyone laughed. His mother, his father, the polished cousins. Even Gregory, my husband, chuckled softly and reached for his coffee like nothing had just shattered in the middle of that perfect sunlit brunch table. But I didn't laugh, because in that moment, surrounded by champagne flutes, monogrammed napkins, and people who had smiled at me for 7 years without ever seeing me, I realized she wasn't wrong. I had already disappeared, bit by bit, polite nod by polite nod. I'm 34 years old, and I no longer recognize the woman sitting there in that floral sundress, chosen to match Patricia Caldwell's garden elegance dress code. The one who once dreamed in color and designed fearlessly, who used to cry at movies and laugh from the gut, who now measured every word, every outfit, every smile like she was still being interviewed for a role no one ever intended to give her. That day, something cracked. Not loud, not messy, not visible to anyone else at the table. But inside me, a silence split open like thunder. I didn't storm out. I didn't throw my drink. I didn't make a scene they could later dissect over wine and passive-aggressive pity. I simply lifted my glass, locked eyes with Amanda, and said, "Challenge accepted." Then I swallowed the last sip of my mimosa and swallowed, for the very last time, my pride. They thought it was a joke. They didn't know I'd already made the decision. I would disappear, but not in the way Amanda meant. I wouldn't just fade into the background like I'd done for years. This time, I would vanish from their world and reappear in one where I didn't need their permission to exist. This is not a story about heartbreak. This is not a story about revenge. This is the story of a woman who walked out of the life she was expected to endure and finally stepped into the one she chose. Brunch with the Caldwells wasn't a meal. It was a production. Patricia Caldwell, Gregory's mother, ran it like a military operation disguised in floral arrangements and heirloom china. Every spring, without fail, she hosted what she called the seasonal family gathering, though no one dared call it anything less than an event. The invitations were emailed 6 weeks in advance, color-coded by RSVP status. The dress code was casually slipped into the email subject line. Garden sophisticate, light tones encouraged. God forbid anyone wore navy. The table, a long stretch of imported wood with matching white chairs and pastel place cards, was arranged on the back patio, overlooking a lawn so perfectly manicured it looked airbrushed. The food was catered by one of the city's top brunch chefs. Patricia never cooked herself, of course, but she always claimed credit for the menu curation. When Gregory and I arrived, was holding a strawberry shortcake I'd baked from my late grandmother's recipe. It had taken me 3 tries to get it just right the night before. It was my one small act of authenticity, something real in a world of gloss. "Vanessa," Patricia greeted, air kissing both sides of my face like we were Parisian heiresses. "So sweet of you to bring something. We have the patisserie handling desserts, of course, but homemade is charming." She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen, her tone kind, but with just enough precision to suggest, "Please remove your contribution from sight." I smiled anyway, because that's what you do. Inside, I placed my shortcake on a side counter, already crowded with offerings from lesser guests, neighbors, girlfriends, extended cousins, who hadn't yet earned a spot in the real family narrative. Amanda's tiramisu, on the other hand, had pride of place at the center of the dessert table, on an antique cake stand, garnished with gold-dusted cocoa powder. I emerged from the kitchen to find Gregory already deep in conversation with his father and their business partners. He didn't look for me. I drifted between conversations, offering to help set up, trying to chime in during discussions of ski resorts and second homes in Tuscany. But I was background noise in a world that didn't have room for my volume. "Charlotte, darling," Patricia called out, beaming as she welcomed Gregory's brother's wife. Charlotte, the pediatric surgeon, the golden daughter-in-law, the one who wore pearl earrings and didn't blink at caviar. She was introduced to everyone, twice. I, on the other hand, received a nod. Even the way they spoke was rehearsed, every word calibrated. Amanda effortlessly slid from gossip about celebrity divorces to commentary on luxury real estate, her voice dripping with both approval and correction. If you mispronounced a wine label, she'd smile sweetly and say, "That's adorable." But today would be different. I had decided that on the drive over, while Gregory reminded me to be impressed by his father's new imported espresso machine, like it was a cultural artifact. Today, I would try one more time. I'd share my design project with pride. I'd smile, but not shrink. I'd participate like I belonged. What I didn't know was that this brunch wouldn't just be the end of my patience. It would be the end of my silence. And it would start with a single sentence. The strawberries had to be perfect. Not just ripe, but fragrant, sun-warmed, sliced thin enough to melt into the cream, but not collapse under it. I stood in our kitchen the night before the brunch, hands sticky with sugar, willing each layer of the shortcake to carry the weight of something more than dessert. It wasn't just a family recipe. It was my peace offering, my placeholder at the table. It was tradition from my side. Real tradition. My grandmother used to bake it for church picnics in the summer, and every year, my mother swore hers never tasted quite as good. When I was little, I thought it was because my grandmother used magic. Now I knew better. She used care, precision, love. And that's what I was pouring into this version. Because what else could I offer them? I tried everything else, bought the right wine, sent the thank you notes, memorized the names of their family friends' children, but still, after 7 years, I remained a guest in their presence, a tolerated variable, never quite ours, only ever Gregory's wife. This shortcake was my last quiet plea. Let me in. Once it was chilling in the fridge, I turned to the other impossible task, my outfit. The email had been clear. Garden sophisticate, light tones, nothing too bold, which was Patricia speak for, blend in, but look expensive doing it. I stared at my closet for too long. Most of my wardrobe still reflected the creative life I used to lead. Linen jumpsuits, patterned scarves, soft denim, not the clean beige tones and delicate florals of the Caldwell aesthetic. Finally, I pulled out the one sundress I'd bought specifically for their gatherings. Pale yellow, flowy, fitted just enough to look intentional. I'd worn it only once before. Patricia had said it was very cheerful. I wasn't sure if she meant that as a compliment, but I held on to it like one anyway. I laid the dress across the bed and stared at it. It looked like it belonged in their world. I didn't, and yet, I tried, again, because part of me still believed that if I could just get it right, just once, they'd let me in, that someone would notice the effort. That maybe, this time, Gregory would see how hard I was trying and say something, anything, to back me up. I didn't want grandeur. I didn't want praise. I wanted belonging. I wanted to stop feeling like I was holding my breath every time I walked into that house. The next morning, I dressed carefully. I curled my hair the way Patricia once said framed my face nicely. I kept my jewelry minimal, studs and a delicate bracelet. My makeup was neutral, tasteful, invisible. I tucked the shortcake into a travel carrier and triple-checked the whip-to-berry ratio. Gregory came downstairs while I was loading it into the car. "You look nice," he said absently, already glancing at his phone. "Let's not be late, you know how Mom gets." He didn't ask what I'd made. He didn't offer to carry it. I sat in the passenger seat, sundress smoothing against my thighs, shortcake balanced carefully in my lap. I watched the trees blur past the window as we drove toward the house where I would once again try to belong. I didn't know yet that this would be the last time. I didn't know yet that today's shortcake would never be tasted. And I didn't know that a single sentence, delivered with a smirk, would turn this brunch into a turning point I couldn't come back from. There was a rhythm to Caldwell gatherings, silent rules dressed as tradition, hierarchies disguised as hospitality. No one explained them out loud, but everyone followed them, flawlessly. Gregory never needed to remind me. The rules were baked into every raised eyebrow and over-enunciated compliment. Speak softly, but not too little. Smile, but not too widely. Share, but nothing too personal. Be memorable, but only in ways they approve of. At brunch, Patricia moved through the garden like a diplomat at a summit. Her laughter, crystal clear and practiced, rose at the right times and never too loudly. She floated between groups, offering gentle corrections masked as charm. "Oh, darling, we placed the Prosecco flutes on the right side. No need to bring anything, of course. Your presence is gift enough." A comment so perfectly rehearsed I had no idea if she meant it. Probably not. Amanda was the queen bee, but her throne wasn't built. It was inherited. She didn't earn the spotlight. She was the spotlight. Gregory's sister could turn a story about getting stuck in traffic into a TED Talk. She had that way of leaning in like she cared, only to use your own words as a springboard for her own monologue. Every joke had a target, and most of the time, it was me, polished, precise, always smiling. Gregory floated easily in that world. He slipped into conversation with his father about market trends and foreign investments like it was oxygen. They understood each other, without tension, without translation. I watched him laughing at something Richard said about AI-generated earnings projections and wondered if he ever spoke to me like that anymore. Not lately. Michael, the younger brother, got to be the rebel. He showed up in a polo shirt instead of linen, arrived late, drank too much champagne, and everyone called it charming. His wife Charlotte was the exception to every Caldwell rule. Beautiful, brilliant, poised, and somehow adored. Patricia called her our Charlotte as if she'd sprung from the family tree fully formed. No one called me our Vanessa. When I spoke, the conversation often shifted. When I offered a thought, it was nodded at, then pivoted around. It wasn't rude, not in the way that leaves bruises, but it was distant, like I was standing behind glass, close enough to see, never close enough to reach. It was in the details. The way Patricia introduced Charlotte by her full title, a pediatric surgeon, while I was just Gregory's wife. The way Amanda recounted old family vacations I'd never been part of, eyes flicking toward me when the room laughed. No one had to say I didn't belong. They didn't need to. It was stitched into the napkins, folded into the seating arrangements, glazed into Amanda's knowing smile. And I had become so good at pretending not to notice, I almost believed myself. Almost. The fork in my hand hovered above my plate as I waited for the right moment. Just a small pocket of silence to offer something of myself. The conversation swirled around imported wines and someone's renovation in the Hamptons, the cadence effortless, rehearsed. I waited, smile in place, nodding at intervals, until finally there was a lull long enough to slip in. "I just wrapped a branding project for a new bakery downtown," I began, a touch too brightly, hoping my enthusiasm might land somewhere. "They're opening next week. Really charming spot. I designed the signage and..." Amanda leaned forward, cutting in with a casual flick of her hand. "Is that the place with the neon sign out front?" Her voice was light, but the undertone was surgical. "I drove past it the other day. Looked a bit loud, didn't it?" I opened my mouth not to argue, just to explain the vintage concept, the history of the building, things that mattered to the design. But Charlotte laughed softly at Amanda's quip, and Richard jumped in with a memory about a Parisian patisserie he once visited. And just like that, the conversation was swept away, repackaged into something they could hold without my fingerprints on it. Gregory didn't look at me. He was laughing now, his voice blending into the chorus of amused chatter. My hands were still resting on the tablecloth, my fork untouched. It was always like this. I didn't want center stage. I didn't need applause. I just wanted to be heard, to have my work acknowledged the way Charlotte's surgeries were, or Amanda's latest campaign pitch. But my accomplishments floated through the room like invisible dust, catching the light for half a second before dissolving into silence. I tried again later, more gently this time, when the topic had drifted to social media. "Actually, that bakery client is launching an Instagram campaign soon. I created a few teaser reels, short form, stop motion." "Oh, reels," Amanda sighed dramatically, waving a hand. "I swear if I see one more dance tutorial set to vintage jazz, I'll throw my phone into the sea." Laughter again, louder this time. Even Frank, Gregory's hard-of-hearing uncle, nodded vaguely. My voice faded. I placed my fork down, careful not to make a sound. The tablecloth was white linen, and suddenly I felt like I matched it. Present, clean, decorative, and entirely replaceable. I stopped trying after that. I nodded. I smiled. I let their world spin without me. Not in bitterness, at least not right away, but in quiet resignation. I had brought my best to the table, my work, my story, my effort, and it hadn't even made a ripple. It was then I realized I wasn't part of the conversation. I was just background noise with good posture. It happened between the Eggs Benedict and the second round of mimosas. The sun was high now, casting sharp shadows across the white tablecloth, making everything feel too bright, too exposed. Amanda was in the middle of one of her stories, something about running into a lifestyle influencer at her gym. She had the table's full attention as always. Gregory leaned in, smiling with that familiar mix of admiration and amusement he rarely gave me anymore. I sat with my hands folded, half listening, half counting the minutes until I could politely excuse myself. I'd stopped expecting interest in my own stories, but then someone, Charlotte maybe, mentioned how exhausting influencer culture had become, and Amanda took a sip of her drink, smiled lazily, and said it. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. The words fell into the center of the table like a dropped knife, sharp, cold, precise. For a second, no one moved. Then laughter, first a snort from Michael, then a ripple around the table. Even Patricia smiled behind her champagne flute. Gregory chuckled, not loudly, not cruelly, but enough. He didn't look at me. No one did. The moment stretched, surreal and weightless, like I was watching it happen from just outside my body. I could feel my cheeks flush, not with embarrassment, but with clarity. Not one person at that table thought to defend me. Not one voice said, "That's not fair," or even, "That's not funny." Because to them, it was. And maybe in their eyes, it was true. I didn't cry, I didn't flinch, I didn't even blink. I picked up my mimosa, held it like a glass of something stronger, and raised it slowly in Amanda's direction. "Challenge accepted," I said. Silence. Amanda's smile faltered, just for a breath. Then Patricia let out a bright, tinkling laugh, performative and far too loud. Richard asked if the brisket was ready. The moment was wiped clean, like a spill on the tablecloth. But I knew better. That wasn't a joke. It was a confession. Amanda had simply said out loud what the rest of them had always shown me in quieter ways. I looked around the table at these people I'd spent 7 years trying to win over, trying to belong to. I saw perfectly styled hair, practiced smiles, and a circle that had never really been open. Gregory's eyes met mine at last, but there was no recognition in them, no apology, and I realized I was done asking to be seen, so I smiled too. Because they thought this moment would pass. They didn't know that it had just changed everything. The air around the table shifted, just slightly, enough that I felt it on my skin before I registered what had just happened. Amanda's voice still hung in the air, sharp, glinting, triumphant. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. The kind of line she delivered like it was air, effortless and disposable, but this one had weight. This one had aim. No one stopped her. No one gasped or winced. There was only laughter, light, smooth, unbothered. Patricia's tight giggle, Michael's loud bark of amusement, even Charlotte's restrained chuckle, and then Gregory, my husband, joining in with the kind of low, automatic laugh that said, "Don't make this a thing." I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I stared at the condensation sliding down the stem of my mimosa glass. My fingers didn't tremble. My pulse didn't race. I was very still, like something inside me had gone completely quiet. This wasn't the first time Amanda had made a dig at me. She'd been doing it for years, dressed in silk, hidden beneath charm, always delivered with a smile. But this time, something landed differently. Not because it was the cruelest thing she'd ever said, but because it rang with clarity. It wasn't a jab. It was a truth, spoken aloud in front of the people who mattered most to my husband. And no one thought to disagree. So I lifted my glass, slowly, deliberately. My mimosa caught the sunlight like gold. I turned to Amanda, locked eyes with her, and said, calm as breath, challenge accepted. The laughter stopped, not abruptly, but like a record slowing. Amanda blinked, her smirk softening just a touch. Patricia tilted her head, confused, like she hadn't quite heard me right. Gregory looked up finally, brow furrowed, but not in concern, just curiosity, like he'd sensed a ripple in a glass of otherwise still water. And then, as quickly as it had stilled, the conversation spun on. Richard asked about the smoked salmon. Amanda resumed her anecdote, though with a faint tremor in her voice. Gregory leaned back in his chair, took another sip of his coffee, and said nothing. But something had changed. Inside me, beneath the sundress and the practiced smile, and the strawberry shortcake still sitting unnoticed in the kitchen pantry, something had settled, or snapped, or maybe just finally clicked into place. I'd spent years hoping they would one day turn toward me, open the circle, make room. But now I saw the truth as clearly as the bubbles rising in my glass. There was no space for me here. And so I stopped trying to fit into a life that had no shape for me. I set my mimosa down, and I began to plan my exit. The ride home was quiet in the way only long familiarity can make unbearable. Gregory drove with one hand on the wheel, the other scrolling lazily through his messages at red lights. I watched the trees blur past the window, my hands resting in my lap like something folded and forgotten. He hadn't said anything about Amanda's joke. Not during the meal, not after, not even when I excused myself early to help clear dishes. An offer politely declined by a caterer who barely looked at me. He'd laughed. That was all I remembered now, the sound of it. Soft, comfortable, complicit. I think Dad's brisket was the best it's ever been, he said finally as we merged onto the highway. His voice was light, like he hadn't noticed the ice forming in the space between us. I didn't respond. He glanced at me, just briefly. You were quiet today. Still I said nothing. He sighed. Come on, Vanessa, don't be like this. I turned my head to look at him then, really look. His jaw was tense, the muscle ticking just beneath his temple. He hated discomfort. He'd always preferred smooth waters. And when the current turned, he simply rode faster, pretending it was all part of the plan. I'm not being anything, I said finally. You're clearly upset, he said, as if that were the problem. My reaction, not the reason for it. I looked out the window again. Did you think what Amanda said was funny? He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched so long I thought he might not answer at all. It was just a joke, he said at last. That's how she is, you know that. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him. And you know who I am. Or at least you should. He didn't reply. Another silence took root. Thicker this time, more permanent. I let my eyes fall closed for a moment. Not to sleep, but to listen, to the engine, to the hum of the road, to the widening distance between the woman I used to be and the one I had become in a single afternoon. When we pulled into the driveway, Gregory shifted the car into park, but didn't move to get out. He just sat there, thumb tapping at the steering wheel. Are we going to talk about this later? He asked. No, I said simply, not later. I opened the door, stepped out, and closed it behind me with the kind of quiet that echoes louder than any slammed door ever could. And inside I began the silent process of leaving. The morning light came in soft and gold, spilling across the hardwood floor like it hadn't witnessed the night before. Gregory was still asleep, his arm flung over my side of the bed, breathing slow and even. I lay beside him, eyes open, heart steady, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer me one final reason to stay. It didn't. At 6:07, I slipped out from under the sheets and padded barefoot to the closet. The air felt hollow, the way it does just before a storm. I moved quietly, not because I was afraid of waking him, but because the calm had settled into me like a decision long overdue. I didn't rush. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. In the suitcase I hadn't used since our last anniversary trip, when he'd spent most of the weekend on calls, I folded 3 pairs of jeans, 2 sweaters, a white blouse, my favorite coat. Practical things, neutral things. Nothing that would be missed from the curated life I was walking away from. From the bathroom, I took only what was mine. My toothbrush, my moisturizer, the lipstick shade he once called too bold. It went in first. I left the dresses he liked, the heels I wore for family dinners, the beige trench coat Patricia had complimented. They weren't mine anymore, not really. Maybe they never had been. I unplugged my laptop from the charger on my desk, my real desk, the one tucked in the corner of the guest room where I'd once built a business, now mostly used for emailing RSVPs and researching caterers. My sketchbook went into the bag last. I hadn't drawn in weeks, but I still carried it like a lifeline, a small rebellion I wasn't ready to let go of. The kitchen was quiet. I made a cup of coffee, black, and drank it standing by the window while the sun stretched further across the lawn. Gregory's car keys were on the counter. His phone buzzed with a calendar reminder for his Tokyo trip. Life was still happening, just not mine, not anymore. On the table, I left a letter, not dramatic, just the truth. A few lines to say I needed time and space, that I'd taken only what was mine, that I wasn't running, I was reclaiming. I slipped my wedding ring off and placed it gently on top. No tears, no anger, just breath. As I locked the front door behind me and stepped into the cool morning, the suitcase rolling softly across the pavement, I felt it. Not guilt, not fear, relief. The pen felt heavier than it should have, like it knew the weight of what I was about to write. I sat at the kitchen counter, the same place I'd made grocery lists and RSVP'd to charity events I never wanted to attend. The coffee maker clicked off behind me. Outside, the morning was still and indifferent. It felt like the right moment to leave. The paper was plain, printer paper, nothing poetic, just something clean. Gregory, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm not writing to hurt you, and I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just need to say this clearly, once, before the noise of your life drowns it out again. I have spent 7 years trying to belong in a space that never truly opened to me. I adjusted myself so many times, I can't remember who I was when I first met you. I thought love would be enough. I thought effort would matter. I thought being your wife would eventually feel like being part of your family. It never did. Yesterday, when Amanda said what she did, it didn't hurt because it was new. It hurt because it was true. And you laughed. You didn't mean to, maybe, but you did. And in that moment, I finally understood that I had been waiting, hoping for someone to stand up for me. Not just in public, in private, in the quiet places where loyalty is tested, not performed. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done trying to be seen by people who've already decided they don't have to look. I took only what is mine. I paid my share of the upcoming bills. You'll find all the passwords in the drawer beside the oven, where you've never once looked. I'll let the lawyers handle the rest. Please don't contact me right now. I need space to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly shrinking to fit into someone else's life. Take care of yourself. I hope you find what you're looking for. I'm going to try and do the same. Vanessa. I reread it once. No edits, no dramatics, just the truth, as clean and bare as the paper it lived on. I reached down, slipped the ring from my finger, and set it gently at the top of the page. It looked small there, lighter than I remembered. It used to symbolize permanence. Now it just marked the place where I ended and someone else had begun. The granite counter was cold beneath my palm as I stood. I didn't glance back when I left the kitchen. The door clicked shut behind me like punctuation. And that was the last time I stepped out of that house as someone's wife. The air in Seattle was cooler than I remembered, heavy with early spring rain and the sharp scent of pine. It clung to my skin as I stepped out of the car, suitcase wheels dragging softly across the uneven pavement. The building wasn't much. Faded brick, crooked window boxes, a front stoop that creaked under my weight. But it was mine, or at least mine for now. A month-to-month lease, no doorman, no marble, no curated floral arrangements in the entryway. Olivia was already waiting by the door, a paper bag of groceries in one arm, a set of keys in the other. She looked like home, messy bun, hoodie, no makeup, no pretense. Her eyes searched mine, but she didn't ask questions. She just handed me the keys and said, "It's small, but it's warm." Inside, the studio was barely larger than the bedroom I used to share with Gregory. A narrow kitchenette, a single window with chipped white trim. The bed wasn't made. The floor squeaked when I walked across it. I loved it instantly. Olivia unpacked the groceries while I stood in the center of the room, unsure what to do with my hands. My life, condensed into 2 suitcases and a laptop bag, sat slouched against the wall like quiet witnesses. "You okay?" she asked finally. I nodded. I wasn't, not really, but there was something peaceful in that. For the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend. "I made the right choice," I said, more to myself than to her. Olivia handed me a can of soup and a worn spoon. "That's all that matters." Later that night, I lay under a too-thin blanket, listening to the soft hum of the city through the cracked open window. It was the opposite of silence in the Caldwell house. No soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers, no distant clink of wine glasses or murmured conversation. Just the steady breath of a place alive and imperfect, the kind of noise that makes space for you. I thought about the life I had left behind, the version of me that dressed carefully for brunches and laughed at jokes that hurt. I felt sorry for her, but I didn't miss her. She'd tried so hard to belong somewhere that had no intention of letting her in. Now I belonged nowhere, and it felt like freedom. The next morning, I made coffee in a chipped blue mug Olivia had left behind. I sat cross-legged on the floor, steam rising in front of my face, and opened my laptop. I didn't know exactly what I was going to build from this, but for the first time in a long time, I was the one choosing. The rain came on my 3rd day in Seattle, hard, steady, unapologetic. It drummed against the windows like it had a right to be there, soaking the streets and washing the sky clean of everything false. I watched it from the narrow window beside my bed, wrapped in a blanket that didn't quite reach my toes, feeling like the city itself understood what I couldn't put into words. I booked the therapy appointment almost by accident. Olivia had left a list of local resources on the kitchen counter next to the tea bags and instant oatmeal, written in her looping handwriting. I wasn't planning to call, not really, but my fingers dialed anyway. And when the receptionist said, "We just had a cancellation tomorrow at 10 a.m., I said yes before I could think of a reason not to. The office was in an old house converted into something clinical. The waiting room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and wet coats. I sat in the corner, damp jeans clinging to my knees, pretending to scroll through my phone while my heart beat like it knew a secret I wasn't ready to hear. Dr. Lewis was kind without being soft. She didn't offer tissue right away. She didn't tell me to breathe. She just said, "Tell me where it hurts." Like I was a patient walking in with a broken limb I'd been pretending wasn't fractured. So I told her. I told her about the brunch and the joke and the silence that followed. I told her about the years of smiling through invisible wounds, of shrinking myself to fit into a space that kept shifting just out of reach. I told her about the strawberry shortcake that never made it to the table. She listened. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush to fill the space between my sentences. At the end of the session, she said something I still hear when the city feels too big, too wet, too unknown. What Amanda said wasn't the cause of your leaving. It was the moment you realized you were already gone. I walked home under a gray sky and let the rain soak through my coat. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I let it hit my skin, my hair, the places I'd kept protected for too long. People passed with umbrellas and hoods pulled tight, but I walked bareheaded, eyes open. The water ran down my face like forgiveness. And maybe it wasn't healing, not yet, but it was a beginning. A washing away of the performance, of the pretending, of the carefully curated life I'd left behind. By the time I reached my apartment, I was dripping and freezing and more myself than I had been in years. The first client came through a Facebook message I almost ignored. A college acquaintance launching a food blog needed a logo. She couldn't pay much, just something clean and cute, but she'd remembered I was a designer. That small detail, the fact that she still connected me with creativity after all these years, lit something in me I hadn't felt in months, maybe longer. I stayed up late that night, sketching rough ideas on a napkin beside a lukewarm cup of tea. It wasn't for the money. It wasn't even for the portfolio. It was just to see if I still could, and I could. The second project came through a freelancer platform. A dry one, ebook formatting for a self-published memoir, but steady work. Then came a request for a social media banner, then another logo, then a website header. Nothing glamorous, nothing groundbreaking, but mine. Every client I took on, I chose with care. No more Caldwell introductions. No more favors passed through Gregory's name. These were strangers who didn't know my husband or my marriage or the woman I used to be in rooms that silenced me. These were people who found me for my work, not my proximity to someone else's success. I worked from the floor at first, propped against a borrowed pillow, my laptop heating my legs as the rain tapped against the window. My back ached. My eyes stung, but my mind was alive again. The designs weren't polished, not at first. I had to retrain my instincts, shake off years of creating things that looked right but didn't feel right. I stopped asking, would this impress Gregory? Or worse, would Amanda roll her eyes? And started asking, does this speak? Does it breathe? Is it mine? There were days I didn't feel capable, days I doubted I'd ever reclaim the creative hunger I once had. But then I'd finish a project and feel it, a flicker of something familiar, a thread tying me back to myself. I started waking up with ideas again, not dreams, not plans, ideas, shapes, colors, fonts I wanted to build entire moods around. I filled pages with half-formed concepts, most of which would never leave the sketchbook. But they were mine. For the first time in years, my work wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about earning a seat at a table that never saw me. It was about returning to the girl who used to draw on cafe napkins, who used to believe that her ideas mattered. The designer hadn't vanished. She'd just been buried under layers of compromise. Now, piece by piece, she was coming back. The coffee shop smelled like cinnamon and old wood, the kind of place where time softened around the edges. I was there to meet a potential client, a woman named Eleanor who'd emailed me about redesigning the menu boards and flyers for her cafe. She hadn't mentioned a budget, hadn't asked for a resume, just, bring anything you've made that feels like yours. That last part had stayed with me for days. Eleanor was already seated when I arrived. Her silver-streaked hair twisted into a loose knot, glasses perched low on her nose, a chipped mug cradled in both hands. She didn't bother with pleasantries, just gestured to the chair across from her and said, "Let's see what you've got." I opened my laptop and scrolled past the polished portfolio, the sleek logos, the safe layouts, the Caldwell-pleasing palettes. I paused at a folder I hadn't opened in months. Personal, uncommissioned, unapologetic. Designs I'd made late at night, just for me. I hesitated, then clicked. Eleanor leaned in silent, studying each piece like it was a puzzle worth solving. Some of the work was messy, bold, unrefined, but it was honest in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in years. "These," she said finally, tapping the screen, "these feel like someone who has something to say." I sat back, unsure how to respond. I was used to clients who wanted sleek and inoffensive. Safe. Eleanor sipped her coffee and met my eyes. "You've been hiding," she said, "and not very well." I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. "I want you to do the menu project," she continued, "but on one condition. Every week, you bring me something personal. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't even have to be good. It just has to be yours." I blinked. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because good designers are everywhere. Honest ones? They're rare." It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a compliment. It was an invitation. That night, I opened my sketchbook and drew without a client in mind. I didn't think about market appeal or whether the colors were on trend. I let my hands move like they used to, like they remembered what it was to create without apology. The next week, I brought Eleanor a chaotic, color-drenched poster that made no practical sense. She held it up, smiled, and said, "Now we're getting somewhere." Each week after that, I peeled back another layer, and with every piece I made, I felt something return. Not just skill, but voice. The version of me I'd put in a drawer for the sake of acceptance was stepping back into the light, bolder than before. I wasn't just designing again, I was speaking. The email came on a Tuesday morning, buried between an invoice reminder and a digital receipt for oat milk. I almost missed it. The subject line was innocuous. Design inquiry, organic product line rebrand. I clicked without expectation, one eye still on the window where rain streaked lazily down the glass. The agency was Westwood Creative. Their name alone made my heart stutter. They weren't local, and they weren't small. I'd followed their work for years, their bold packaging concepts, their unapologetically clever campaigns. Agencies like Westwood didn't reach out to freelancers like me, not unless they already knew what they were looking for. The message was brief, professional. They'd seen my work for Eleanor's Cafe featured in a local design blog. Clean lines, strong voice, thoughtful color. They had a campaign in development for a new organic product line under Sheffield Consumer Brands. My aesthetic, they wrote, might be a perfect fit. I reread the email 3 times before the name sank in. Sheffield Consumer Brands. The name wasn't familiar on its own, but the longer I stared at it, the more a cold understanding crept in. I opened a browser, typed the name, hit search. Sheffield was a subsidiary of Caldwell Marketing Group, Gregory's father's company. Of course it was. For a moment, I sat completely still, my breath shallow. It was too neat, too well-timed, too perfectly ironic. I felt the old flutter of dread at the base of my spine, the instinct to retreat, to say no before they could find a way to twist it. But then I read the message again. They'd found me, not through Gregory, not through the Caldwells, through work I had done on my own, on my terms, with my voice. They hadn't asked for my resume. They hadn't traced me through LinkedIn connections. They'd seen my work and followed it. I leaned back in the chair, the rain soft against the window now, more like breath than weather. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, the choice was mine. I opened a new email draft and typed slowly, carefully. "Thank you for reaching out. I'd love to learn more about the project." My finger hovered over send. I thought about Patricia's brunches and Amanda's smirk. I thought about Gregory's silence. And then I thought about the woman who had raised a mimosa and made a promise to herself, not to them. I clicked send. Whatever this campaign turned out to be, it wouldn't be about them. Not anymore. This time, I wouldn't disappear. This time, I'd be impossible to ignore. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I had. The formal project brief from Westwood sat open in front of me, clean, clear, exciting. High visibility, strong budget, full creative control. Every box checked, except one. Sheffield Consumer Brands. Every time I saw the name, I felt something twist in my stomach. Not fear exactly, not anymore, but memory, residue, the weight of years spent trying to be enough for people who had already decided I wasn't. This campaign wasn't just any project. It was backed by the same empire that had once smiled at me with teeth too white and eyes too indifferent. If I said yes, I'd be designing for a brand owned by Richard Caldwell's company, my ex-father-in-law, the man who once explained synergy to me at his dining table like I was a child who'd wandered into a business meeting. And yet, this wasn't a favor. No one had pulled strings. I wasn't being asked to design something because I was Gregory's wife. I wasn't anyone's wife anymore. They came to me because they saw what I could do. I sat back in my chair, arms crossed, heart tight. What would it mean to say yes? Not just creatively, personally, to willingly step back into a space that once silenced me, but on my terms, with no borrowed name, no borrowed value. The old me would have declined, politely, graciously, quietly. She would have told herself it was to protect her peace, but really it would have been fear. Fear of being pulled back into their orbit. Fear of being reduced to that quiet girl in the sundress again. But that woman didn't live here anymore. I looked around my small apartment, the half-finished sketches on the wall, the chipped mug of cold tea, the pile of invoices paid entirely by my own hands. I wasn't the same person who stood in their kitchen writing a letter of goodbye. I wasn't asking to be included. I wasn't asking for anything at all. This wasn't a return. It was a reintroduction. I closed the document and opened a new one. A proposal, my rates, my scope, my terms. I wrote without hesitation, without shrinking, without wondering if I sounded like too much. When I was done, I signed it with my full name, just mine. Before I hit send, I paused, just once, long enough to feel it, the tremble of the past knocking faintly against the present. Then I sent it anyway, because maybe the strongest kind of power isn't found in avoiding the places that once hurt you. Maybe it's found in walking straight through them, and knowing you'll never be small there again. The ballroom shimmered in candlelight, all champagne gold and muted elegance, the kind of setting where people spoke in curated tones, and no one ever raised their voice. It was exactly the kind of place Patricia Caldwell would love, grand but tasteful, performative but never loud. I stood near the edge of the crowd, heels grounded against polished marble, my name tag clipped to the neckline of a deep emerald jumpsuit I'd chosen deliberately. Not black, not beige, something that stood out without begging. I didn't need to blend in anymore. The Sheffield rebrand had taken months of work, hundreds of design drafts, late-night meetings with the Westwood team, layers of strategy that built into something bold and fresh. I knew every pixel, every shade of green on that packaging. This campaign had come from my hands, my mind, my voice, and tonight it was being unveiled. I didn't expect the Caldwells to be here, not really. A part of me had hoped they would be, if only to see what I'd built from the ashes they left behind. But I told myself it didn't matter. Then I heard it, Richard's unmistakable laugh, cutting through the gentle hum of the room like a reflex I hadn't fully unlearned. I didn't turn right away. Instead, I held my glass of sparkling water tighter, focused on the branding display at the front of the room. Sheffield's new look printed on banners, on tasting tables, on sleek product stands. My work, everywhere. When I finally looked, they were all there. Richard commanding a circle of executives near the bar. Patricia impeccably dressed, scanning the room with cool calculation. Amanda sipping from a flute and talking with her hands. And Gregory standing a little apart, his posture straighter than I remembered, but his eyes distant. All of them just as I left them, untouched by my absence. Until they saw me. Amanda clocked me first. Her expression flickered, surprise, then something unreadable. Richard's smile faltered when someone gestured toward the display and said, "That's the lead designer over there, the woman in green." And Gregory, he didn't look away when our eyes met. He stared like I'd stepped out of a photograph he thought he'd buried. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned to Thomas, my project lead, and walked toward the stage with him. When the lights dimmed and the spotlight swept across the presentation screen, it was my name that filled the room, my voice that explained the process, my designs that drew the applause. I stood in front of the people who once made me feel invisible, and this time, they couldn't look away. Not because I had become someone else, but because I had finally stopped asking them to see me. She found me near the dessert table, where I was pretending to choose between lemon tartlets and dark chocolate mousse. In truth, I wasn't hungry. I just needed a moment to breathe without eyes on me. The presentation was over, the applause had faded, but the adrenaline still hummed in my spine like electricity with nowhere to go. "Vanessa," Amanda said, as if my name had surprised her on the way out of her mouth. I turned slowly. She looked exactly as I remembered. Hair sleek, dress flawless, expression curated. But there was something different in her eyes. Less certainty. A flicker of something that might have been caution. "Amanda," I replied, steady as ever. "I didn't realize you were involved with Sheffield's rebrand," she said. Her tone was neutral, but the slight emphasis on you wasn't lost on me. I smiled. just enough to be polite. Westwood brought me on early in the process. She nodded once. It's impressive. The pause between her words said more than the words themselves. She wasn't used to complimenting me, not sincerely, not without lacing it with irony or condescension. I waited for the usual follow-up. Bold choice, aren't you worried it's too edgy? Or I wouldn't have guessed this was your aesthetic. But it didn't come. Instead, she looked past me, toward the display still lit at the edge of the stage. My work, basking under museum-level lighting. I saw the packaging at the grocery preview last week, she said. Didn't even connect it to you. That's understandable, I said, voice level. You never really saw me before. Her gaze snapped back to mine, not in anger, but in recognition. For a second, neither of us spoke. It was the first honest moment we'd shared in years. I didn't think you'd really leave, she admitted softly. When you walked out after the brunch, I thought it was just theatrics. I tilted my head. That's because you assumed I needed you to notice. Amanda looked at me differently then, not like an adversary or an annoyance, but like someone she hadn't taken the time to understand. Maybe she was beginning to. You look different, she said, the compliment half-formed but real. I am different, I replied. Or maybe just no longer edited. She nodded, slow, her drink shifted in her hand, untouched. Well, she said, squaring her shoulders again, slipping back into her usual armor. The brand looks fantastic. You did good work. And then she turned and walked away, not in triumph, not in dismissal, just a quiet exit from a conversation she hadn't expected to have. I stood there, still as glass, heart calm, head clear. For once, Amanda didn't get the last word, because this time, I didn't need one. I saw him hovering near the back of the ballroom, just beyond the glow of the display lights. Gregory looked smaller somehow, not physically, but like someone who'd been holding a shape for too long and had finally let it go. His suit was perfect, as always, but his posture had softened, less polished, more real. He waited until the crowd had thinned and the buzz of conversation had lowered to a hum. I was gathering my things from the presenter's table when he approached, hands in his pockets like a boy unsure of his welcome. Hey, he said quietly. I looked up. Gregory? He exhaled, half a laugh, half something heavier. You were incredible up there. I gave a small nod. Thank you. I didn't know, he added, like the words had been sitting in his mouth all night. That you were doing work like this. I mean, I always knew you were talented, but this is something else. I always was, I said gently. You just weren't looking. He winced, but didn't deny it. You're right. A pause passed between us, neither sharp nor soft, just honest. I've been in therapy, he said, since you left. At first it was because I didn't understand what happened, but then I realized. I'd been walking through our marriage with my eyes closed. I didn't respond, not because I didn't believe him, but because I needed to hear the rest. I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping you happy. I didn't realize I was asking you to shrink so everything around us could stay comfortable. I looked at him then, really looked. For the first time in a long time, there was no defensiveness in his face. No charm, just a man who'd been left, who'd had to sit in the echo of what he hadn't said when it mattered. I miss you, he said. Not out of habit, not because it's convenient. I miss who you were when you still smiled like it reached your eyes. I swallowed hard, not because I wanted to cry, but because it hit a part of me I thought had gone quiet. I don't smile like that anymore, I said. He nodded. Maybe not, but the way you stood on that stage tonight, you looked like someone who finally remembered how powerful she is. For a moment, the silence between us was something softer, not reconciliation, but recognition. I don't expect anything, he said. I just wanted to say I see it now. I see you now, and I'm sorry I didn't before. I let the words hang there. I believe you, I said, and I hope you keep looking. We didn't hug, we didn't make promises. We just stood there, two people who had once tried to build something together and had learned too late how little they understood the blueprint. She found me by the coffee station just after dessert, her heels clicking softly against the marble like a whisper you can't quite ignore. I was pouring a cup of black coffee, grateful for something warm and grounding, when I heard her voice behind me, perfectly pitched, just above a murmur. "Vanessa, darling." I turned slowly, careful not to spill. Patricia stood there in a pale silk dress that probably cost more than my rent, her signature smile fixed in place. Not tight, not fake, practiced. A weapon dressed as warmth. "It's lovely to see you again," she said, as though we were old friends bumping into each other at a farmer's market. "You too," I replied, matching her tone but not her enthusiasm. I didn't owe her anything more. She looked me over the way she always had, eyes sweeping quickly and cataloging quietly. "You look well. The emerald is a bold choice. It suits you." It wasn't a compliment. It was a test, a reminder of the old rules. Speak softly. Don't take up too much space. Don't wear colors that stand out. "Thank you," I said. "I chose it because it doesn't blend in." Her smile didn't falter, but something behind it wavered. A flicker, a crack. "I must say," she went on, "the presentation was quite something. Everyone's been talking about it." "I'm glad," I said. She nodded once, as if she were granting approval. "You've clearly been busy. It's wonderful to see you, thriving." The pause before that last word was just long enough to make it sting. Thriving without us, it meant. Thriving despite it all. I sipped my coffee. "Yes, I have been." For a second, she didn't speak. And in that silence, I saw it, not guilt, not even regret, but discomfort. An unfamiliar feeling she hadn't prepared for. "I hope there are no hard feelings," she said finally, her voice gentler now. "Family dynamics can be complicated." I smiled, the kind of smile you wear when someone thinks they've offered an olive branch, but all you see is a stick. "They can," I agreed. "But clarity makes things simpler." Patricia blinked, her expression slipping just slightly, like she wasn't sure if that was agreement or defiance. She recovered quickly, of course. She always did. "Well," she said, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve, "I'm sure we'll be seeing more of you around." "Maybe," I replied, tone light but uncommitted. "Only if it's worth my time." Her smile stayed on her face, but the crack was there now, running beneath the surface like a fracture in porcelain. Still holding, but only just. I turned back to my coffee, took another sip, and walked away without looking back. Some smiles aren't meant to be returned. The lighting in the conference room was cooler than the warm hues of the gala, sterile and bright. Vanessa adjusted the mic clipped to her lapel, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her, some curious, others expectant, and a few, those she knew too well, watching for cracks. She didn't give them any. Behind her, slides projected crisp visuals of Sheffield's new packaging campaign. The redesigned logos, the clean lines, the soft color gradients, all chosen with care, with purpose. Her voice, calm but assured, guided the audience through the branding process, her strategy for digital integration, and the way each design element tied back to the consumer experience. She'd rehearsed it, of course, but standing there, she didn't sound rehearsed. She sounded real. Near the front row, Richard sat stiffly in his seat, arms crossed but brows raised in interest. Patricia beside him, nodding faintly, her expression unreadable. Amanda, a few seats over, watched with her usual carefully concealed disdain, but even she wasn't texting, which Vanessa decided to take as a win. Gregory sat in the last row, arms resting on his knees, face open, jaw slightly tense. He looked like a man seeing something or someone for the first time. Vanessa clicked through to the final slide, a mock-up of an interactive product display with augmented reality elements. She explained how it worked, how it would engage a younger demographic while preserving the brand's heritage. A few people in the audience murmured appreciatively. One woman near the back started jotting notes. When she opened the floor to questions, hands went up. Real questions. about execution, about budget allocation, about consumer psychology. No one asked who she was married to. No one referenced Gregory or the Caldwells. In this room, she wasn't anyone's wife, daughter-in-law, or family plus one. She was the expert. Richard raised his hand. Vanessa called on him with practiced poise. This interactive concept, have you seen real data showing consumers actually use these kinds of features? He asked, his tone skeptical but not dismissive. Yes, Vanessa replied without missing a beat. Pilot testing at 3 Seattle locations showed a 22% increase in engagement. That's early, of course, but the conversion rates are promising, and we'll have full analytics embedded in the system to track performance post-launch. Richard nodded slowly, not approval, but recognition. After the session ended, people approached her with questions, compliments, business cards. She responded to each with the same grace and confidence that had carried her through the presentation. She saw Gregory once more before slipping out for a break. He didn't speak, just watched, the way someone watches a fire burn, transfixed, humbled, maybe a little afraid. As she stepped into the quiet hallway, Vanessa took a breath that felt bigger than her lungs. The room behind her was still full of noise and chatter, but she had said what she needed to say. And this time, everyone had listened. Vanessa found Gregory leaning against a wall in the corridor just outside the lounge. His tie loosened, hands tucked into his pockets like they used to be after long dinners and soft arguments. He straightened when he saw her, like he wasn't sure how much formality she would expect now. "You were brilliant in there," he said. "Truly," she nodded. "Thank you." A pause. Then he said, "I wasn't back then." She met his eyes. "No, you weren't. I thought I was protecting our life by keeping things smooth," he went on. "But I see now I was protecting the version of myself that didn't want to make space for someone else's voice." Her silence held, not cruel, just quiet. "I'm not asking for anything," he added. "Not forgiveness, not a second chance. I just wanted to say I finally understand what you meant when you said you were tired of disappearing." Vanessa looked at him, the man she once built a whole future around, and felt no anger, only distance and peace. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," she said. "I left because I stopped loving the version of myself I had to be around you." His shoulders dropped slightly, as if those words settled something. Then came the familiar click of heels behind them. Patricia. "Vanessa," she said, voice clipped but warm, the way one might speak to a promising young employee. "You certainly made an impression today." Vanessa turned to face her. "I didn't come to impress you." Patricia blinked. "Well, you did. The rebrand is elegant, unexpected, but elegant." "That's because I stopped designing to fit into rooms like yours," Vanessa said calmly, "and started designing like I belonged in them." A flicker passed through Patricia's eyes, not quite offense, not quite admiration, something older, recognition maybe. "We were hard on you," she said finally. "Colder than we should have been." "You were," Vanessa agreed, "and I let it happen." She let the words land, not like weapons, but like truth laid gently on a table. "You've changed," Patricia said, folding her arms. "You carry yourself like someone who doesn't need permission anymore," Vanessa finished. For once, Patricia didn't argue. Vanessa looked at them both. Two people who had once defined the shape of her days, the silence of her nights, and felt no need to ask anything of them. No longing, no ache, just clarity. "I wish you both well," she said, "but I'm not coming back. I'm moving forward." Neither tried to stop her. She walked away, her heels soft against the carpet, her spine straight, her voice, finally, her own. Vanessa was seated on a bench just outside the venue, letting the night air cool her skin. The stars above Seattle were faint, blurred by city light, but still there, steadfast, distant. She hadn't meant to stay this long, but the quiet after so much noise felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. She heard the footsteps before she saw her. "Amanda," Vanessa said without turning. "Do you always know when someone's behind you?" Amanda asked, half a laugh in her voice, though it didn't sound like it had traveled easily. Vanessa smiled faintly. only when they've been following me for years. Amanda sat beside her, uninvited but not unwelcome. Her dress shimmered under the streetlight, flawless as ever, but her face was softer now, less guarded. There was no wine glass in her hand, no audience, just two women and the weight of what had gone unsaid for too long. "I never thought you'd actually leave," Amanda said after a moment. "I know," Vanessa replied. "I thought," Amanda shook her head, "I thought you'd always find a way to bend. You were good at that, at making yourself smaller without breaking." Vanessa didn't answer. She didn't need to. "But then you walked out," Amanda continued, quieter now. "And when you didn't come back, not after a week or a month, I started asking myself why. Why someone would leave a life like that. Our family, my brother." Vanessa looked over at her, not sharp, but clear. "And what did you decide?" "That maybe it wasn't the life I thought it was," Amanda said. "And maybe I wasn't the person I thought I was either." Vanessa studied her face. Amanda had always been polished, controlled, charming with just enough sting to keep her place at the center. But now, in the absence of control, she looked human. "I was jealous of you, you know," Amanda said. Vanessa blinked. "Of me?" "You didn't pretend," she said simply. "Not like I did. You were always yourself, even when you were trying to fit in. And the truth is, we didn't make room for you because we didn't know how to handle what didn't match us." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest Amanda Caldwell had ever come. Vanessa looked out at the skyline. "I didn't leave to hurt anyone." "I know," Amanda said. "But you leaving forced us to look at things we'd built our lives around. And some of it, maybe most of it, was hollow." They sat in silence for a while, not hostile, not warm, just honest. "I don't expect us to be friends," Amanda said as she stood. "But I think you were right to go, and I think you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Vanessa looked up at her. "I always was, you just didn't want to see it." Amanda nodded. "Well, I do now." And then she walked away, leaving Vanessa with the stars and the sound of her own quiet power echoing in the space between them. The new apartment wasn't perfect. The floor creaked near the kitchen, the windows stuck when it rained. The shower ran hot, then suddenly cold, like it hadn't made up its mind. But it was hers, chosen by her, filled with things she'd brought in one piece at a time. An old velvet chair from a vintage shop, a lamp she assembled while listening to Nina Simone, the tiny cactus Olivia gave her with a note that read, "Low maintenance like you." She had plants now, ones she remembered to water, not because she was trying to prove she could nurture something, but because they made her space feel alive. On the bookshelf were sketchbooks stacked between novels she hadn't yet read but wanted to, for no reason other than her own curiosity. The studio Vanessa had dreamed of was no longer a dream. It was real, humming with life and clients she respected. There were branding calls in the morning, creative briefs in the afternoon, and bursts of inspiration at 2 a.m. when the city was asleep and she wasn't. Her desk bore the gentle chaos of creation: coffee rings, swatches of fabric, scattered color palettes, sticky notes with scribbled thoughts. She didn't need validation from the places she'd once begged to be seen. She no longer designed to win over rooms, but to speak clearly in her own voice. And the work was better for it. More daring, more human. Her client list grew, but carefully. She said no often. That word used to terrify her. Now it was part of her freedom. There were people in her life who knew her fully. Olivia, of course, always showing up with soup or wine or unsolicited advice. Eleanor, who pushed her artistically and never let her hide behind safe choices. And a handful of new friends, writers, photographers, a woman who ran a small ceramics shop and smelled like clay and pine. No performance, no armor, just presence. She went on dates sometimes. She laughed sometimes. She cried too, but rarely out of loneliness now. More often it was something small and beautiful that overwhelmed her. A street musician playing her mother's favorite song, a child handing her a crumpled daisy, a stranger complimenting her earrings in the checkout line. Vanessa had come to understand that healing wasn't a finish line. It was a rhythm, a series of steps forward and pauses to catch her breath. She had made peace with the silence, and even with the past. Not by erasing it, but by choosing not to live inside it anymore. And every morning she woke up beneath windows she had chosen, in a home where nothing was borrowed, nothing was forced. Just light through glass, her feet on the floor, and a life finally, entirely her own. There was a moment one morning in early spring when Vanessa stood barefoot on her balcony, with a coffee mug pressed to her chest, and realized she hadn't thought about the Caldwells in weeks. Not in anger, not in sadness, not even in comparison. They simply weren't there. Not in her choices, her space, her reflection. The city stretched wide beneath her, the skyline softened by fog, the street humming gently with beginnings. She could smell the bakery downstairs, prepping for the morning rush, hear a dog bark in the distance, and somewhere close by, a wind chime dancing on someone else's porch. Ordinary things. And yet extraordinary in how fully they belonged to now. She hadn't disappeared. Not really. She'd simply stepped out of a role she never auditioned for. The silent wife, the polite guest, the woman who smiled too much and spoke too little, the one who had been tolerated instead of embraced. Leaving hadn't been an act of rebellion. It had been an act of remembering who she was before the performance, what she loved before it had to impress anyone, the part of her that once believed she could shape the world with her own hands, and then had gone quiet under all the weight of being palatable. She was louder now, but not in volume, in presence. Her life was made of things that were fully hers. The friends who saw her, not because she stood in their spotlight, but because she stood in her own. The clients who trusted her ideas, not her proximity to a last name. The choices made without explanation. The soft no's, the unapologetic yeses. The quiet evenings, the bold color palettes, the laughter that didn't require approval. Vanessa had once feared disappearing, as if being unseen by the Caldwells was the same as ceasing to exist. But the truth was, in vanishing from their story, she had finally begun writing her own. She didn't need them to remember her, because she remembered her. Every sketch, every boundary drawn, every moment spent not proving herself was another thread woven into the woman she had reclaimed. And this woman, sharp, tender, rooted, was more visible than she had ever been. Not in their rooms, in her own life. So she stood in the morning light, coffee cooling in her hands, and smiled. Not for anyone watching, not for anyone waiting, just for herself. And this time it reached her eyes.